That's much better. Thank you. Ryan, am I okay with audio? Is that working? Okay. Well, I hope that the way in which I'm inviting you to step in and experiment a bit with liturgy is not too confusing, because I'm just giving you different pieces to experiment with and explore. Things that have to do more with sound and energies and embodiment as we step beyond ordinary kinds of understanding, even beyond wisdom. It's said that liturgy makes the invisible visible. It helps us embody the mystery. And just as a brief, I say brief. The chants that we do, we already spoke a bit about the one on Mahan, but the first chant that we do at the end of sitting in the morning is the verse of the robe. If there were a room full of monks, they'd be putting on their okesa, or maybe their rakusu. This is the small version of the larger robe that is patchwork. It's this patchwork, but it's small. And we say together, vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. So we say right off the bat, after our first morning sitting, what is vast? What does it say? Vast is what?
The robe of liberation.
Oh, what's vast is liberation, not suffering. Suffering is limited, actually. And we're held in, swathed in, warmed by, comforted by, consoled by, in the robe of, this is the Buddha's body. In fact, the woman who taught Blanche Hartman, my teacher, she was like the preeminent sewing teacher of this particular tradition. And her teacher found that this person in Japan was collecting antique okesas, the robe, and it made her crazy. Why would you need more than one? Each one is the entire body of the Buddha. She thought it was the most ridiculous and actually irreverent thing to do. Joshin-san was one of these Japanese women, that was about this tall, but very mighty and extremely powerful. When I was in Japan with Blanche, Joshin-san had died. I didn't get to meet her. But the stone for her ashes site had been placed at Taiji, the monastery where she would often go with Kodo Sawaki Roshi. And Blanche said, I want to go see her stone. So I went with her from Kyoto. It was really cool because we were on one of those bullet trains, which is amazing, you know. Not only are they insanely smooth, but it was weird. Like the 7:05 train, you'd be in the station in Kyoto and those clocks with the little things. You know, when it went 7:05, the train would stop. It was precise, you know. But going down the west coast of Japan on the Sea of Japan, in and out of these tunnels and along, it was so beautiful. And you look out, you know that China would be the next thing, you know, we're Dogen. And we went to this temple, and there were all these steps that you could see when we were going up this switchback. The taxi could hardly get us up this switchback thing. And there's these steps going up through this forest. And she said, yeah, Joshin-san would come, and in the winter to get her there, they'd carry her up the steps to get her up there, and we got to go and visit and stay with them a while. Vast is the robe of liberation. And then that beautiful poetic line of formless field of benefaction. It's not that goodness and beneficence doesn't take form. It's not limited to any particular form. And we live in this formless field that takes shape and resolves itself, and takes shape and resolves itself over and over and over in each moment. And wearing the universal teaching, wearing the teaching, not understanding it, not memorizing it, not theology, not psychology, not philosophy, wearing it in our bodies. That's why we do these embodied practices. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature. So when you, for example, hear that beautiful music and that monk chanting, you know, it does something to you, doesn't it? Not simply because it's beautiful, but there's something you can't name, at least I think, for a lot of us anyway, that moves through us because we're wearing the teaching. We don't know what the teaching is because it isn't understandable. It's the embodied inconceivable, but it's realizable. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. So a huge amount of the teachings are right there, right off the bat, you know. And today, in the particular format that I had us do, we did the repentance next, which we always do, all my ancient tangled or twisted karma, from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion. All the karma that ever produced this one, from beginningless, it's not your fault. It's beginningless. Greed, hate, and delusion. It comes with a deal. If you get a body, you get greed, hate, and delusion. But the next line says what? Born through body, speech, and mind. But guess what? I'm carrying it. Therefore, I have to be responsible for it. So I stand up in the middle of my life and I say, guess what, folks? This is me. I now fully avow. I admit it. This is who I am. Not I'm a lowly sinner, not I'm a terrible person. This is who I am. And that's how we start practice. By coming home, we hear the call of the Han. This stuff's serious. So we're going to come to practice. And the first thing we do is say, oh, I've got to admit who I am. Okay. But then once we do that, well, if I'm not going to follow all my preconceived ideas and notions and distortions about how to live life, what do I use? Well, that's the refuges. Oh, I can come back to the Buddha, to the teacher, to the Dharma, to the teachings, and to the people who are going to help me. And by the way, it doesn't just mean Buddha like Buddha. It means Buddha nature. Come home to yourself, to your own true nature. Realize how the Dharma flows through your body and how our shared bodies are one body, one heart, one mind. And so we chant those beautiful lines. I take refuge, we take refuge in Buddha. And then that strange line, before all being. I can read that two ways. Like in front of you, before all being. I take refuge before all being. Or, I take refuge, the taking of refuge comes before I construct myself into a self. Before that, immersing body and mind deeply in the way, awakening true mind. We take refuge in Sangha before all being, entering deeply the merciful ocean of Buddha's way. Before all being, bringing harmony to everyone, free from hindrance, and taking refuge in Sangha. And you notice that we have amended these chants. Some of you may not know amended, but traditionally they're just I. And you see that we do them 3 times. I take refuge, or I, and then we, and then all being. It's the personal, the relational, and the universal. And now to just say it seems weird. Like, why would you just stick with that? That's not even the basic teaching. So, just one person's opinion. And then today I added Hymn to the Perfection of Wisdom, which I think is particularly beautiful. So the perfection of wisdom is Prajna Paramita. And it's gorgeous the way we're talking about the womb of the Dharma, the mother of all Buddhas, the perfection of wisdom. Homage to the perfection of wisdom, the lovely, the holy, the perfection of wisdom gives light. Unstained, the entire world cannot stain her. The womb of Buddha nature in you is the source of light. And from everyone in the triple world, meaning past, present, future, she removes Buddha nature. Awakening removes darkness. They call it enlightenment. The light comes on. Most excellent are her works. She brings light so that all fear and distress may be forsaken. It's interesting, the word forsaken, given up. It's like you can hold it or you can let it go. And disperses the gloom and darkness of delusion. And child, there's a lot of gloom and darkness these days, isn't there? In a lot of ways. She herself is an organ of vision. She is the place from which we see, hear, feel the truth. That's in every one of you. She has a clear knowledge of the own being of all dharmas. That's a more complicated one. But anyway, she has a clear vision of truth. And she doesn't stray away from it because she doesn't have delusion, because she, it, we, they, it's kind of like this pronoun thing right now, you know? The perfection of wisdom of the Buddhas sets in motion the wheel of Dharma. Paying homage to this in us, in all of us, and that we share, the womb, the place we hold, that sets in motion the wheel of Dharma. And then we chant the Heart Sutra. That's a whole nother Dharma talk, but in the Heart Sutra, it's very interesting. It starts out, Avalokiteshvara, who helps all to awaken. So Avalokiteshvara is the Bodhisattva of what? What is Avalokiteshvara the Bodhisattva of?
Compassion.
Say that.
Compassion.
Compassion. Right. This is the sutra on the heart of realizing wisdom beyond wisdom. And who starts out? The Bodhisattva of compassion. Not Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom. Avalokiteshvara moves in the deep course of realizing wisdom beyond wisdom, sees that all 5 streams of the body, heart, and mind are without boundary, and then teaches Shariputra, who is the premier disciple of the Buddha. So now we also have a figure that is often, not always, but often shown as female, Avalokiteshvara, Kuan Yin, teaching this guy who's supposed to be the smart guy. And we just chanted the hymn to the perfection of wisdom, couched in a And Avalokiteshvara is the one that says, guess what? Form and emptiness, form and boundlessness are the same thing. They're not separate things. And this wisdom that goes beyond wisdom, the place that actually the Fukan Zazengi is going to teach us about, it doesn't arise, it doesn't perish, it doesn't make problems, doesn't stain, doesn't purify, because this is the unconditioned. And everything that it's saying that it doesn't have, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, mind, sound, scent, all that stuff are conditioned phenomena. And it's saying, guess what, folks? This is beyond that. This is not contained in that. All of that is contained in it. Including attainment, being free of attainment. Those who help all to awaken abide in the realization of wisdom beyond wisdom and live with an unhindered mind. Sounds good, huh? So once again, this is a lot, but you see that this, we chant this over and over because it's basically saying, here's the bad news, everything you think isn't right. And every conclusion you come to is partial. And every place you come to rest will be pulled out from under you. Get used to it. One of the old koans, you know those crazy stories? One of them is, how do you step off the 100-foot pole? Suppose you've attained. Suppose you've gotten to the top. How do you take that one more step? How do you actually step off what you think is any attainment into the wisdom that's beyond wisdom? That's gate, paragate, parasam. Gone beyond even that. Falling apart, falling completely apart, releasing it all. And then we enjoyed the Enmei Juku Kanangyo. And I very specifically did not offer a translation. It's not necessary. It's better to go with the sound. This, if you were Catholic, it would be calling on Mary. Since we're at St. Kate's, you gotta. And saying, please take care of me, bless me, protect me. And the Daihi Shindarani, which we didn't chant, but we got to hear that unbelievably beautiful recitation. And by the way, we're going to share the link because the video, you think the sound makes you weep. Put them together, and just get some tissue. It's really, really gorgeous. The Daihi Shindarani is quite long, and it's often done in memorial services. So it takes that sense of taking care of those we want to care for, and it goes even deeper. It's very, very profound, and you could feel the profundity, I think. It's like, why am I weeping? It's pretty, but that's not the whole thing. And I hope you could feel when we were chanting the Enmei Juku Kanangyo what it's like to embody it, those things. So that's just a little riff on some of our services, just so you have maybe a little better feel for. These aren't just random things, it's the entire teaching. And we didn't do Bodhisattva vow today, which often will come at the end of that, in which we turn toward the world and say, beings are numberless. I vow to free them all. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them all, or we. Dharma gates, opportunities for awakening are endless. I'm going to go through all of them as they show up. And then Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. We're back to that. And you notice something very curious about this, right? Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. This is impossible. Every one of these is literally impossible, right? Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them all. Wait a minute. There's a trick here. Because this is a vow. Vows are not attainable. They're like a guiding star that never lets you go astray because he keeps guiding you. Goals are attainable, not vows. Vows are endless directions. And then the third recitation just gets me the way beings are numberless. This vow frees them all. Delusions are inexhaustible. This vow ends them all. Dharma gates are boundless. This vow enters them all. And then, hang on, Buddha's way is unsurpassable. This vow embodies it. Making the invisible visible. allowing us to step into the mystery without having to understand anything and swim in it, entering deeply the merciful ocean of Buddha's way. So I hadn't planned on any of that, so now we're pretty far along, but because we want to look at the Fukan Zazengi, the this yellow one that has the numbers by the. This is the one we'll go over. But first, before we do that, we have to have our psalm for the day. You know? So one of the central organizing principles, the way that we teach at Appamada, and I think it's represented beautifully in Awakening Together, is that the Dharma is most fully and most deeply expressed and revealed in relationship. We are concave and convex creatures. We receive the Dharma in each other, and we're expressive functions. The Dharma invokes both. And in the introduction to Norman Fisher's opening to you, the Zen-inspired translation of the Psalms, he speaks to this kind of insight. Here, I'm going to quote him for a second. He says, although our lives are located in our hearts and minds and bodies, they're also located, perhaps more poignantly, in the space between us. And we emphasize this all the time. That's also why in Kenhin we pay attention to the space. And being a good Jewish man, he speaks about Martin Buber. And in the famous classic, I and Thou, with Buber speaking about the same thing. Here's what Fisher says. He says, for Buber, there is no God, no absolute, no present moment outside the profound relationship that takes place between the I and the you, between the self and the other. Within the hallowed reaches of this ineffable experience, but of course Buber says it's actually not an experience, but that's another Dharma talk too, our true self takes place. Relationship is the theme of actually all the Psalms, specifically the most difficult of all relationships, the relationship with God, which that little boy had an intimation of. And by the way, his mom, my friend Denise, said she just about wrecked the van when he turned to her and said that, As you can imagine. It wrecked me just sitting, But of course, in Zen practice and in Buddhism, God can be a problem because it's a non-theistic practice. It doesn't deny God. That's just not the thing. It's about suffering or what we can do about how to live our life. And it's a pretty big sticking point for a lot of us, right? Am I the only one? It just kind of can be a sticking point. So this is what Norman says. He says, for many of the religious seekers I have encountered, the word God has been all but emptied of its spiritual power. Even when it is taken in its most positive light, it seems often reduced and tamed, representing some sort of circumscribed notion of holiness and morality. For me, he said, what is challenging about the word, God, is exactly that it is so emotional, metaphysically emotional. It's an interesting way to think about it, isn't it? The relationship with God that is charted out in the Psalms is a stormy one. Any of you who have read them will. A stormy one, codependent, passionate, confusing, loyal, petulant, sometimes even manipulative. I mean, most of the Psalms are a rough ride. It's not like, oh, how nice. And Norman says, I wanted to find a way to approach these poems so as to emphasize this relational aspect, while avoiding the major distracting pitfall that words like God, King, Lord create, right? He said, my solution was simple. I decided to avoid, whenever I could, all these words and instead use the one English word that best evokes the feeling of relationship, the word you. So this, I thought, was kind of a stunning and poetic choice. In doing so, what Norman does is he transforms you into a koan, rather than a someone or something to be known. It's like this profound question. Suddenly he forces us to confront the central question of who or what is this you, and who am I? And now we're back to Zen, right? In the last lines from the introduction, Norman writes, with human consciousness and with language, the perfect silence is broken. And that's what I've wanted to experience this morning, all this sound and vibration. So with language, and the perfect silence is broken, is necessarily broken with language. As we call out with words to that which doesn't have a name or a location, to all that immensity that surrounds us everywhere, inside and outside. So when you're chanting, you don't know what you're saying, but you want to call out, don't you? That's why it ramps up. It's like, wow, let's go, you know? The word you contains all that, including all of its sadness, intimacy, and power. For in the word you, God becomes painfully and intimately close, utterly unreachable in its nearness. This is Norman. Isn't that gorgeous? At the heart of inquiry, when we encounter, who am I? What is this? Relationally, we have to ask ourselves, who or what is the you being addressed in the Psalms? Back to the Psalms. Is it an external being, a universal energy or consciousness, our deepest true nature, or the ultimate unknowable mystery? Like, what is this? Might these all be some different ways of talking about, the one, or whatever you want to call it, Buddha nature, awakening in general? So let's look at Psalm 46. So I'll just go through it first. You are our protection and strength, help in the storm of anguish and despair, exactly and easily found close at hand, so we are not afraid. Even when earth's in upheaval, when mountains are carried to the sea, when the sea's waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake and tremble with the waters swelling, in the middle of the world there is a river. In the middle of the world there is a river. Streams run into it, making glad your cities, making glad the places where you are known. You flow as the waters of that river. And she shall not be moved, for you are with her. You are the morning that dawns over the quiet waters. Nations rage, kingdoms crumble. What we see is all you're doing. These desolations, these terrifying moments, only your unmoving moment. You cause wars to cease when they cease, to cease forever. You break the bow, snap the bow, snap the spear, burn up the war wagons. Be still, and know me. Be still, and know that I am what the nations grope toward. I am earth's desire. So we know you are with us, our defense, at the silent center of things. You want to read it? Please, sir. Would you like to read it, please?
Open. You are our protection and strength, help in the storm of anguish and despair, exactly and easily found close at hand, so we are not afraid. Even when earth's in upheaval, when mountains are carried to the sea, when the sea's waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake and tremble with the waters swelling, in the middle of the world there is a river. Streams run into it, making glad your cities, making glad the places where you are known. You flow as the waters of that river, and she shall not be moved, for you are with her. You are the morning that dawns over the quiet waters. Nations rage, kingdoms tumble. What we see is all you're doing, these desolations, these terrifying moments, only your unmoving movement. You cause wars to cease when they cease forever. You break the bow, snap the spear, burn up the war wagon. Be still and know me. Be still and know that I am what the nations grope toward. I am earth's desire. So we know you are with us, our defense at the silent center of things.
Without going through it line by line, you hear the friction of the modeling world right here, don't you? Climate change, everything. Everything is here. That indented, italicized piece at the end, let's say it together. And say it like you mean it. Because the me is you. Okay? Let's say it to each other. Here we go. Be still. Be still and know me. Be still and know that I am what the nations grope toward. I am earth's desire. So we know now you are with us. Our defense at the silent center of things. Our love, our relationships, our connection. And this, in this extremely difficult time in our world, of course we long for help in the storm of anguish and despair. When the earth's in upheaval, nations rage, man, kingdoms tumble. We know you're with us. Who's with us? What do we have faith in, you know? How do we know? And toward the end of the psalm, you know, we hear the response and the injunction to practice, which you just repeated. Be still. Sit. Not be passive, not give up, not shrink back, not put your head in the sand. Find stillness and know me. Find stillness and know what's most deeply and profoundly true. Be still and know me. I am what everybody's striving for, even when they're idiots. I'm not speaking of anyone in particular, but any particular politician, but even when there's something there that wants to find the depth, the truth. And that is Earth's desire, both the ground and the sky and everyone on it. And how do we come to know what is with us, that what is on our side? The psalm says, our defense at the silent center of things. I love that. Our defense at the silent center of things. Be still and know. This is the entry gate to the koan of you, to be still. And that's what the Fukan Zazengi is about. My suggestion, born out of my own experience and the guidance of my teachers, is this gate is entered through Zazen. And this is Dogen's message in the Fukan Zazengi. I'll tell you a secret. All of Zen is in Zazen and the precepts. That's all you have to have. And you're doing a bang-up job, apparently, of offering the precepts here. Excuse me. And here we are studying Zazen. This is the entry gate to the whole thing. Of course, we do other things, we talk about other stuff, but... So let's actually look at the Fukan Zazengi, okay? Now, as a bit of an overview, those of you that have read Dogen before, or those of you who haven't, I'll say it again. He always says the whole thing in the first few sentences. And then he just goes on. But he gives you the whole deal right up front. But it's easy to miss, you know? The first, in number one, the one that's labeled, you know, the first one tells you the main question. And then the next three tells you, pretty much, that first four things are the whole deal. And then the next three sections, which we looked at yesterday, 5, 6, and 7, are the instructions. Like, okay, if you want to practice that, this is what you do. And this was pretty much lifted out of an old Chinese manual that he got when he was in China. Then the remainder is a bunch of warnings, encouragements, teachings, admonitions, and even a reference to the Diamond Sutra and my name. The first time I went to San Francisco Zen Center, the very first day I was there and I was getting oriented to the temple, the guy that was showing me around, he came to the place where the shoe rack was and the gaitan that goes into the zendo, and he said, "Oh, what's your name?" I said, "Flint Sparks," and he went, "Have you ever read the Fukan Zazengi?" I said, "No, what's that?" He said, "Wait, you'll see." And also there's a reference to the Diamond Sutra in there, by the way. So here we go. It's a quick pass, but let's together read the number one. The way is basically perfect and all-pervading. How could it be contingent upon practice and realization? The Dharma vehicle is free and untrammeled. What need is there for concentrated effort? Indeed, the whole body is far beyond the world's dust. Who could believe in a means to brush it clean? It is never apart from one, right where one is. What is the use of going off here and there to practice? This was Dogen's primary question. If by nature we are Buddha, if Buddha nature is our essence, then why do you need to practice? Like, you can't create it. You can't destroy it. So the way is basically perfect and all-pervading. So he says right off the bat, it's all right here. How could it be contingent upon practice or realization? That would be a conditioned phenomena. If you create some sort of realization, then you could also lose a realization. That's a conditioned phenomena. That's not the ultimate. The Dharma vehicle is free. It's not, nothing's in its way. What need is there for concentrated effort? Well, he was saying this in a place where people are doing meditation for concentration. Indeed, the whole body is far beyond the world's dust. Now, he's alluding to an ancient poem there. He's basically saying, even the stuff you do that's pretty sticky, it doesn't stick to the deepest part. Did we do the Vimalakirti Sutra? Didn't we do that last time?
Yeah, it's a retreat thing, maybe.
2 times ago? Those of you that did it, you remember when the goddess shows up and kicks everybody's butt?
Yeah.
And she throws all the petals? And they stick to the people who don't have much realization, and they slide off the people who are awake? She was great. So who could believe in a means to brush it clean? You know, in that sutra, the people who were stuck to, they tried to get it off and they couldn't. Like, you can't do it. It can be done, but it's not something you can do. It's not an individual action. So what's the use of going off here and there to some fancy temple someplace and practicing? What's the reason I call all the way to Minneapolis? Come on. Okay? He'll answer in number 2. Ready? Here we go. Together. And yet, if there is the slightest discrepancy, the way is as distant as heaven from earth. If the least like or dislike arises, the mind is lost in confusion. Suppose one gains pride of understanding and inflates one's own enlightenment, glimpsing the wisdom that runs through all things, attaining the way and clarifying the mind, raising an aspiration to escalate the very sky. One is making the initial partial excursions about the frontiers, but is still somewhat deficient in the vital way of total emancipation. Okay. Your nature is that of a Buddha, but guess what? Unless you practice with everything you've got, you won't realize it. You won't create it. You can't destroy it, but you may not realize it. If there's the slightest discrepancy, the way is as distant as heaven from earth. If the least like or dislike arises, the mind is lost in confusion. So he's referring there in some ways to the Shen Shen Ming, the poem of the sixth ancestor that starts out. The way is not difficult for those who are unattached to their preferences. Just let go of longing and aversion and everything will be perfectly clear. A hair's breadth deviation and heaven and earth are set apart. For those of you in religion, think about that. The struggle between good and evil is the primal disease of the mind. You know, it goes on and on. 32 different polarities, and pulls the rug out, pulls the rug out, pulls the rug out. In the middle of the poem it says, don't keep searching for the truth. Just let go of your opinions. So he's referring to all this. And then he says, well, suppose you do understand something. Suppose you do kind of wake up. We all have these moments. Glimpsing the wisdom that runs through all things. Attaining the way, clarifying the mind. We have those moments. It's a great thing. And he says, and if you do that, you're like in the suburbs of enlightenment. One is making the initial partial excursions about the frontiers, but is still somewhat deficient in the vital way of total emancipation. You're in a much better neighborhood, but you're not free. Okay? So he says, it's already all here, but if you don't practice with everything you got with a lot of effort, you're not going to realize it. You're not going to create it, but you can't realize it. And then he says, well, here's some examples. Number 3, together. Ready? Need I mention the Buddha, who was possessed of inborn knowledge? The influence of his 6 years of upright sitting is noticeable still. Or Bodhidharma's transmission of the mind seal. The fame of his 9 years of wall sitting is celebrated to this day. Since this was the case with the saints of old, how can we today dispense with negotiation of the way? So he's saying, dude, you know, the Buddha had to sit for 6 years, and he had inborn knowledge, you know, to realize this thing. And Bodhidharma, the figure who took this into China, he sat in front of the wall for 9 years. So if these guys or women have to do it, maybe we probably do too. Since this was the case with these folks, we can't dispense with negotiation of the way by practicing. Therefore, here we go, number 4. You should therefore cease from practice based on intellectual understanding, pursuing words, and following after speech, and learn the backward step that turns your light inwardly to illuminate yourself. Body and mind of themselves will drop away, and your original face will be manifest. If you want to attain suchness, you should practice suchness without delay. I love that last line. Yeah. So he's saying, you've got it. You got to practice. Everybody practiced who end up realizing it. So he's saying, put away all your self-help books, all your Buddhist books, all your podcasts, all the YouTube videos of me and everybody else. And what I'm showing you this weekend, learn the backward step that turns your light inward. Forms, ceremony, ritual, to illuminate yourself. Body and mind of themselves will drop away. You're not going to lose your mind, and hopefully you're not going to die. It's that your attachment to and identification with who you think you are, which is usually through your body and your mind, that attachment will fall away. And then your original face will be manifest. The original face is just an old term that comes from some of the koans about, you'll see who you really are, which isn't all this stuff that you identify with. So if you want to attain thusness, suchness, if you want to step into and resonate with and flow and breathe with the mystery, then plunge into the mystery. And then 6, 7, and 8 is how you do it. And we don't have to read all of it, but if you go through it, it basically is describing what it's like in a temple. Put down your mat, get your thing, sit down, and either the full lotus or half lotus position. And most of us read that and you go, oh geez, no way. I can barely sit in a chair this long. In the full lotus, you place your right foot on your left thigh. What's in between the lines is, or the other way. Have your robes and belt loosely bound. He's talking to monks. And he says, place one hand in the palm of the other in the cosmic mudra. That's the one he's talking about. Or the other way. It's so interesting. I said this in my talk the other day. Some of you saw it. Vicki Austin, who is helping us with the Dharma transmission, she's done 52 of them, I think, or something like that, for people. And she was with Blanche to the very end. She was with me in Jukai. She was with me in my ordination. She was with me in a month in Japan. She was with me at Dharma transmission. And she knew Blanche to the end. She said to me, what is Blanche telling you now during the transmission the final week? And I said, well, it's the darndest thing. She says the same thing every day. She says, take care of your mudra. Because she would do that. It's like, she would say to me sometimes, it looks like your mudra is collapsing. Or you get tight. Or it falls apart. Or you take care of this gentle cosmic holding at your center. It's a very interesting thing. So this is what he's suggesting we do. And then he says, once you've adjusted your posture, number 7, take a deep breath. And then, just like, Chris was saying that, it's like, find your center by moving around a little bit. You were helping us, like, where's that? And when the roll down happens, it's like that boom, 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 boom. It's like a little ping pong ball, Boom, boom, boom. It comes to rest by movement. It finds stillness with movement. And then the famous line, think, not thinking. How do you think, not thinking? Non-thinking. This itself is the essential art of Zazen. Come on. Dogen. Because we read it as you got to stop thinking, which, as far as I know, never happens. Any of you ever stop thinking? Not really. We asked Joko Beck one time, like, what do you do during Zazen? He said, I think about things. Can you sit in such a way where you put most of your effort into attention to your posture? And by the way, when you watch the video of the monk chanting the Daishin Dharani we were looking at last night, it takes your breath away to look at his posture. Not because you should emulate it. To him, it's natural and beautiful, but you can just see it. What if you didn't worry? Am I a good person? Am I a bad person? Am I doing it wrong? Am I doing it right? Do I have trauma? What if you just think, am I leaning forward? Am I leaning back? Am I balanced? What if you spent the entire 20, 30 minutes just attending to being upright, because what you're doing is expressing Buddha. Otherwise, you're trying to attain something. This is an expressive function. This is a ceremony. Why do you think you bow when you come to your cushion? Oh, I'm entering a ceremony. You turn around. Oh, and so are you. And now I'm going to enact the ceremony. And the ceremony is, I don't believe it, but apparently I'm told that I'm a Buddha. So I'm going to sit like one, and I'm going to act as if, and enter this mystery. That's what all these instructions are for. And then in number 9, he says, don't be jumping up. Take your time. And surveying the past, we find that transcendence of both unenlightenment and enlightenment. What? Going beyond enlightenment or not enlightenment. Not being caught. Have all depended on the strength of Zazen. And then he adds some interesting things which are basically historical, which the monks at that time would have understood all the references. Let's read number 10 together. This is one of those, once again, this is the info commercial, but there's more. Here we go. In addition, the bringing about of enlightenment by the opportunity provided by a finger, a banner, a needle, or a mallet, and the effecting of realization by the aid of a husu, a fist, a staff, or a shout, cannot be fully understood by discriminative thinking. Indeed, one cannot be fully known by the practicing or realizing of supernatural powers either. That must be deportment beyond hearing and seeing. Is it not a principle that is prior to knowledge and perceptions? Okay, some of you who've read Zen literature, you understand that there were these guys that would like hold up one finger, or they would wave something, or they would poke you or hit you, or all this stuff. That's what he's talking about. The bringing about of enlightenment provided by whatever the weird thing your teacher did to you, or the aid of a hosu. The hosu is a whisk with horsehair. I have mine with me. I should bring it. A fist, they have violence sometimes. A staff, or a longer one, or a shout. Hey! In other words, these weird things that were done were those pivotal moments, cannot be fully understood by discriminative thinking. You can't understand why you were crying when you were listening to that guy, or listening to me, but it happened. You can't figure it out. Indeed, it cannot be fully known by the practicing or realizing of supernatural powers either. In other words, the ordinary mind is not going to explain it, and some woo-woo thing is not going to explain it. Neither one. You can't make up some, it's because the gods came and the angels, that's not it either. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but kind of. you know, or your individual stuff. It must be deportment. What's deportment? That's an old-timey word. What is it?
Behavior,
What?
action or behavior.
Action or behavior, how you carry yourself. Oh, it's in your body? It's beyond hearing and seeing. It's not even about your, remember in the Heart Sutra? No eyes, no ears, no... It's deportment. Beyond all these faculties. It's the way you carry yourself and are in the world. It's the way you're shaped by your practice. Is it not a principle that is prior to knowledge and perceptions? So sometimes he says it's before all that stuff we do, before all being, remember? And sometimes he said it's beyond, Heart Sutra. So I'm just orienting you to these. Okay, number 11, so he gives you a little more. Here we go. Together. This being the case, intelligence or lack of it does not matter. Okay, we have to stop there. So what did she say about you? Tell that story.
I have great American Southern heritage on my mother's side, and so my grandmama Morris,
From
Tennessee, Central Tennessee, on Bearwalla Road, and I would grow up going once or twice a year to visit them. And we were sitting all at the table. I was probably in high school or maybe early college at the time, and my grandmama Morris, with her southern drawl, said to everyone at the table, I believe I had maybe some friends along with me too. And she said, she kind of leaned back in her chair and she said, the thing I like about Christopher is that he's so smart, but he don't act smart. Now, what did she mean by that?
Right. This being the case, intelligence or lack of it does not matter. Thank goodness, because this doesn't have to be with intellect, does it? So let's keep on going here. Between the dull and the sharp-witted, there's no distinction. If you concentrate your effort single-mindedly, that in itself is negotiating the way. Practice realization is naturally undefiled. Going forward in practice is a matter of everydayness. Oh. So it doesn't matter if you're smart or not, whether you look like it or not, whether you act like it or not. If you concentrate your mind, your effort, concentrate your effort. See, I made a mistake, I said mind. Concentrate your effort single-mindedly. That in itself is negotiating the way. Wholehearted effort. When I've told this story before, but when I was serving, and today you're going to get a little sense of this. When I was serving oryoki at San Francisco Zen Center, oryoki, you eat sitting at your place in bowls. It's a variant of tea ceremony. So you eat your whole meal sitting right in your place, and you have these bowls, and it's very complex, and people come and serve you. And so I was on the serving crew that day, and we had a tray, a big tray, and it was full of these tiny little bowls with tiny little spoons. It was full of gamasho, salt and seeds. And so I was standing at the door waiting for the person who is the sort of director to tell me when it was my turn to go. And then I'm going to step into this room, this big zendo with 60 people sitting in it, and I'm going to go to the abbot first, which means all the way around, and serve them first. And as I'm standing there, I notice the weirdest thing. All the little spoons are jumping. Because I'm shaking. And maybe you've noticed this, I don't know. But a lot of my structure is around perfectionism. And I, at that time, had decades of therapy. I was a therapist. I had a PhD in clinical psychology. And at that moment, a lot of that perfectionism stuff finally, because I realized when the Soku did that with his head, my only job was to take a step and walk and serve wholeheartedly. Not to do it right, not to do it wrong. I was wholehearted effort, but it was wholehearted, not perfected. It's not perfectible. You could be wholehearted, but you couldn't be perfect. My job was to step and go. And that's what it's like every single day. Going forward in practice is a matter of everydayness. One of my friends was serving one day big pots of soup. And he had on a samway, which is the more, not the full robes, but it's, drawstring pants, the 3/4 juban and kimono sleeves, and, it's the working thing. So he has this big thing of soup, and he gets to the abbot, and he bows, and when he does that, his pants fall down. And he can't pick them up, because he has his hand, he's holding soup. And no one moved, no one said a word. He found a place to put it on the ton. He put his pants back on. He continued to serve. When I was in Japan, and some of you heard this story, I was in Japan at Rinsoen, Suzuki Roshi's temple, and I'm at the end of Oryoki, you bring around a little kettle of water so people can wash their bowls. You even wash your dishes and put them away without ever moving. And so, lined up in front of me are Huitsu Suzuki, Suzuki Roshi's son, Mel Weitzman, to whom he gave Dharma transmission, Blanche Hartman, who gave transmission. Here's my lineage in Suzuki Roshi's temple, his son, the next person, and then me. So this is pretty awesome, right? And they're up on a ton, which is about this high. So like I told you yesterday, I go down on one knee. I offer the water to Huitsu. They put their bowl down, 2 at a time. Put their bowl down. I turn to Mel. I give the water to him, and as I'm doing it, the lid of the thing falls off and falls in his bowl and knocks his bowl off, and hot water goes everywhere. And I'm horrified. And I lean forward like this, and Mel leans forward because and our faces are like that close. And he says, "It's only water." And so I find my composure again. I put the lid back on, and I continue. The compassion is profound. But I could not have been met had I not wholeheartedly offered myself in the best way I could and made the mistake. Was it a mistake? Realization arises in response to the energy. That was the energy. So a response could come. That was the opportunity provided by all these things. 12. Ready? In general, this world and the other worlds as well, both in India and China, equally hold the Buddha seal, and over all prevails the character of this school, which is simply devotion to sitting, total engagement in immobile sitting. Although it is said that there are as many minds as there are persons, still negotiate the way slowly in Zazen. Why leave behind the seat that exists in your home and go off in of other lands? If you make one misstep, you go astray from the way directly before you. And oh, by the way, I'm acknowledging that I'm going over here. Is that okay? You want me to keep going? Okay. So in general, he's saying in 1227, this world and other worlds, both in India and China, and now we can say the United States and every place else, equally holds this practice and the character of this school, which is devotion to upright sitting. And it says we're all different, but we all have to negotiate our way in Zazen. That doesn't mean just sitting down on a cushion. Zazen is much more than that. That's the expression. We all have to negotiate our way in that silent center of things from the Psalms. So he's also saying, why leave behind the seats that exist in your home and go aimlessly off to the dusty realms of other lands? It's available here, Minneapolis, St. Paul, or wherever you find yourself. You don't have to go someplace else. And if you don't pay attention to how you're going, you're going to lose the way. That's why we need each other. And we need to practice. And then he gives you the good news here, number 13. Here we go. You have gained the pivotal opportunity of human form. Do not use your time in vain. You are maintaining the essential working of the Buddha way. Who would take wasteful delight in the spark from the flintstone? Besides, form and substance are like the dew on the grass, destiny like the dart of lightning, emptied in an instant, vanished in a flash. You've gained the pivotal opportunity of human form. This is the form in which one can awaken. So don't squander it. You are maintaining the essential working of the Buddha way. That's like somebody, like when you guys came and gave me this present, that's like somebody saying, you have a body, you've been created and manifest as human form. That's the maintaining of the Buddha way. Now you have it, so keep it well. You're not missing anything. You read the stories about all these masters, and you think, what the heck did they do? To get like that. And you know what they did? What you're doing. Not something kind of like what you're doing. Exactly like you're doing. They may have looked a little different. They sat, they studied, they sat with each other, they chanted, they engaged the practice. They didn't do something, nothing's being withheld from you. But the next question you have, I know, or the next thought is, yeah, but they were different. It's not like me, which is really the painful illusion. Every one of these women and every one of these men who were enlightened that we read about, they had a body, they were born, they had a family, full of family dynamics. They were raised at a time when all kind of terrible things happened. They had to grow up, they had to deal with whatever they had to deal. They had exactly the same ingredients you have, and exactly the same practices. It is no different. So what's your excuse now? And it says, who would take wasteful delight in the spark from the flintstone? What is that? Why would you spend your time listening to this guy? No, that's not what it means. When you've made a spark, some of you probably have done this, the old-fashioned, how long does it last? It's just like, it's delightful, but you can't hold on to it, can you? Form and substance are like the dew in the grass, like a dart of lightning. Emptied in an instant, vanished in a flash. In your chant thing, let's see, isn't the
It is.
Diamond Sutra, where is it?
Toward the end, I think.
Is it on the first page?
Why is that wasteful?
Oh, page 2. Left side of page 2.
The left verse of the Diamond Sutra. Let's read this one together. This is right at the end of the Diamond Sutra. A star at dawn, a bubble in a stream, a flash of lightning in a summer cloud, a flickering lamp, a phantom and a dream. So is this fleeting world. Like the dart of lightning, emptied an instant, vanished in the flash. That's how fast life goes, right? So, Your conclusion, 14. Please, honored follower, come on, let's go. Please, honored followers of Zen, long accustomed to groping for the elephant, do not be suspicious of the true dragon. Devote your energies to a way that directly indicates the absolute. Revere the person of complete attainment who is beyond all human agency. Gain accord with the enlightenment of the Buddhas. Succeed to the legitimate lineage of the ancestors' samadhi. Constantly perform in such a manner, and you're assured of being a person such as they. Your treasure store will open of itself, and you will use it at will. Remember the story of the elephant? You know, is it a tree trunk? Is it a leaf? Is it a rope? It's like the wise people trying to figure out what an elephant is that are blind, groping for the elephant. Followers of Zen, long accustomed to trying to figure this thing out, nail it down. Don't be suspicious of the true dragon. That's the awakened self. In other words, don't keep groping around. It's right here. Devote your energies to a way that directly indicates the absolute. Not some good day you have or a bad day you have or a good insight or a lost insight. And those people that you see around you who look like there's something going on, they really awaken, you know, pay attention to them. You'll start resonating with the enlightenment of all the Buddhas. And you'll find yourself in good company. You're in the lineage of the ancestor samadhi. Like, oh, that's the same thing they realized. So constantly perform in such a manner. It doesn't say constantly learn more things and wake up. Act, perform in such a manner. And you'll be like them. That's what I was just talking about. And your treasure store will open of itself. It's the best news, isn't it, at the end? And you'll use it as well. Nothing will be withheld. You'll have it all right there in front of you. So I hope this helps orient you to the Fukan Zazengi a little bit. It's like, this is awesome. This is the whole deal. This and the precepts. Zazen and the precepts. It's all about how to be in the world, how to shape yourself. Thank you for your patience and for allowing me to go on. I wanted to fit all that in today. Typically, we would have a Dharma activity. Did you have something you were going to do? Did you have a prompt?
Shall we use some prompts? We've got about 15 minutes. Okay.
Or 45 minutes,
Yeah.
whichever you want. Because I've gone long and there's been so much, we could take a little longer before we go to lunch.
And
Maybe-
not use that?
Maybe you decide the right amount of time for a Dharma activity, and then the rest of that time right before lunch,
We'll
have
sit.
a little sit.
We'll sit just a little bit before we go.
And did you want to take any questions now, or just moving to?
Oh, why not? Anyone have any questions, including those of you online?
Raise your hand.
They can raise your hand, click the little thing, and Ryan will get you. Oh, good. Ellen's right away. He's coming, Ellen. Hold on. He's not there yet. We can't hear you, but he's working on it. Okay, now.
Now? Ah, there we are.
I can't hear you, though.
Oh, Says I'm not muted.
I hear you now.
Okay. I just had a question on number 9. Let's see, it says, in surveying the past, in surveying the past, we find that transcendence of both enlightenment, of both unenlightenment and enlightenment and dying if you said something about the dying part, I didn't catch it. I was just wondering, how does this number 9 relate to that?
You're muted again.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. We're going to get an echo.
Is to turn off his speaker, but leave on his mic.
Maybe if
Turn off the speaker. There. There. The speaker's off.
Should I mute myself while I listen? Would that help?
Can you hear me?
Turn off both on there.
Can you hear me now? Yes. That looks like she can hear me.
Oh, I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. We have to transcend hearing and not hearing. I think that if you look at I don't know what the original was, of course, but we find that transcendence of dying. So if we leave out that of both unenlightenment and enlightenment and dying. So that transcendence of dying while either sitting or standing. I think he's saying that there's something that Zazen assists us with that allows us to face our dying that's beyond the way we think of as dying. The dying is living. There's a way in which these bodies are born. We think we call it born, we call it living, we call it dying, but those are linguistic things we put on a cycle that's actually one whole thing. And in Zazen, when we sit and breathe, we realize that one whole thing so that we transcend what we call dying.
Living and dying.
Living and dying. It's what's brought us to the practice in the first place on the Han. And it's what we realize as we sit. And so as we breathe, we inhale, we're born, we exhale, we die, all over and over. There are a lot of cycles like this we're sitting with and in, and it opens to us over time in Zazen. There's that famous, when somebody asked Suzuki Roshi about this, about focusing on breathing, he said, in Zazen, just allow yourself to breathe. Follow your exhalation. At the bottom of the exhalation, there's a little space, and then you breathe back in. Let go. You'll naturally breathe back in. If you don't, it's okay. So, are we touching on what you're asking?
Yeah, I just wondered about how that fit into all of that. Thank you so
glad
much.
you asked. It was something that I hadn't I skipped over a little bit, and I appreciate you bringing it forward.
Thank you, Flint.
Thanks, Alan. I think in the room, I think Chris had it. You had your hand up?
I did. I was going back to Psalm 46.
Oh, back to the Psalms.
And I don't really know if I have a question, but you might want to tell me if my interpretation is a little off. Or when I listen to us read this, I'm just delighted, by the way. I need to check this out. It's really interesting to me, the way Norman does the Psalms. And so when I thought, that nations rage and kingdoms tumble and these terrifying moments and desolations, I didn't separate it from myself. I know those things inside of me and in my relationships, right?
Right.
And especially the line that I am what the nations grope toward.
Let's say which line?
That I am what the nations grope toward.
Yes.
That hit me in my heart because it made me feel that all of those ways that we're warlike and conflictual and have our pains that we project outward and cause suffering, every single basis for those things is just because we long for this relational, loving way of being awake.
Absolutely.
And it helps me again and again to see that and feel that in a group, that there's nothing that's separate, and it's really all misguided longing in a lot of ways when we create
Yes.
that suffering. So
It's very touching to you.
yeah, so thank you for letting me say it out loud. Do you have anything in response to it?
It's just an underscoring of what you're saying, and it's just a different way of voicing it. Some of you are familiar with, because I'm training here, an internal family system. So just think of it this way. Self-energy is what everyone wants to return to. That's the deepest desire. In fact, if you just start in the beginning, true self, in the way that Dick talks about in IFS, not self, self-energy, that's our protection and strength. It helps us in the storm. You can just go right on through. Be still and know me, know self, know your true self. But this is what everyone is wanting to come back, instead of being caught in manager practices and with so many exiles that were torn to pieces. It's all there. Sound about right, Robin?
Everything we need is right here.
Yeah. And not quite. It's absolutely true. It's right here as long as I have these two next to me, you know, and I can read, because it requires the other. That was, it's both and. It's like saying, if you have an acorn, there is an oak tree in there. That's exactly true. But it doesn't manifest as an oak tree unless you got soil and water and sun and time. It requires other things. Is it all in there? Yes. Does it require other things for its fruition? Yes. Same with us. That's what the Fukan is saying.
This is a definition thing. Number 3, or Dharma's transmission of the mind.
Oh, There are very technical things about what mind seal means, which I'm not great at describing, but it's basically the passing on of the Dharma. Because in China, something was a final document that was legal and certified in the seal. And so he's saying the real thing. The Dharma brought the teaching from India into China. He transmitted the real deal that's certified. Somebody else out there. Shelley? I think I'm seeing Shelley.
Just have a question about transmission.
Yes.
If the Buddha was able to attain without somebody transmitting specifically to him, is transmission required?
No.
Okay.
For most of us, fallible humans, practice is required in order to bring forward what's always and already true. For us to realize, like I've said. In fact, it said Buddha was born of inborn knowledge. But who knows? It's all mythological. It's basically saying he had what it took from the beginning, but he still had to practice. In fact, he made a lot of missteps in practice early on and realized it wasn't, he tried to see this, he did all the things he was told by his teachers, and he did them quite well. And it didn't answer the question. Essentially, at the height of being a yogi in India, where he had learned and done everything to perfection, he was a failure. It didn't answer his question about suffering. That's when he sat under the tree and said, I'm going to sit here until I realize what the deal is. Even though he had attained everything, accomplished it. And so he did what we have to do, sit down with our own bodies and our own life and our own conditioning and our own mess and wake up.
Mhm.
And so no one gave it to him, but he was given everything and realized it didn't touch something else. He was called to something deeper about suffering, a human being, just like you are, both as a nurse, as a Bhagavad practitioner, and as a student of mine. And all I have to do is name it for you to feel it moving. But my naming it with you and for you is the transmission. I didn't give you the thing, but I do sort of call it forward, right?
Yeah.
That's what transmission is.
Okay. Thank you.
Flint, I just wanted,
There. Endel, you coming forward?
yeah, thank you. So I just want to thank you for the reference to your name, Flint Sparks. And I'm thinking
Oh.
that in most of the cosmologies, it's not really a transmission, but there is a spark in the creation, okay? And it comes from beyond. It's transcendent. And it's that is what sets things in motion in the cosmogony.
It's that pivotal moment or the pivotal thing.
Yes. And so that's what practice is. My understanding is that practice is that stance of receptivity to receive that spark.
That's a great description. I think that's true. You know, almost in a joking way, heard teachers say enlightenment or awakening is always an accident, and practice makes you accident prone.
Yes,
It sets you up for it.
and I just wanted to express the gratitude in my heart for your teaching, because you are that spark in so many ways by your embodiment. I came not to take notes, but to watch you tie your shoes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That's my vow, my hope.
Question.
Yes.
In section 12, with the end of that, why leave behind the seat that exists in your home and go aimlessly off to the dusty realms of other lands? And as you commented on it, like, this is good news, sort of like, you don't have to become a monk, you don't have to go to the monastery to do it, we can do it right here, and we are doing it. And there's something gnawing at me that I also wonder if, like, you know, Dogen, if he's kind of like slipping in a little like secret coded poetic sort of teaching here about back to the practice of Zazen. Like, maybe take, I wonder about taking that as attendance to the posture, like you were pointing out, like not leaving that seat that is our.
It doesn't just mean geographically.
And then
leave
leave
this.
past, future, what I'm gonna have for lunch. You know, those like the dusty realms of other lands.
And the thing about it is, you're going to think about lunch, and you're going to think about yesterday, you're going to worry about tomorrow. And as you're sitting, and all those things are moving, and you're noticing, who's the one noticing? Because the one noticing isn't thinking those things. It's noticing them. Those are objects of your consciousness. Objects of your awareness. Because we identify with the objects of our consciousness primarily. It's another way of saying what he's saying here. We get enthralled by, enchanted by the objects of our consciousness and think that's who we are. But what we realize is that pure awareness is with us all the time. And it isn't just like a witness because that's now you made it into something. It's that and so we sit to express it. While all that other goes on, and he's talking about not being captured by it, not being distracted by it. It will still happen. You're human. That stuff won't stop. If you fight with that, you're going to fight with yourself the rest of your life. This is not about fighting. And 99%, and this is soapbox. 99% of the practices that are taught are manager-based practices. Do this, so you'll get that. And a lot of them help. You manage better. And it's not freedom. Because that's inconceivable and realizable. That's what we keep coming back to.
Question, and this is partly related to the transmission question already. Cheerful. Reminded by the dialogue of teacher Matt McCartney out of England who wanted to reroute into spirituality. He came and studied with Native American elders, and they said, now go back and find it in your own land, be indigenous there. And one of the things he conveyed was that his teachers said to him, we think part of why the Western mind is continues to be so lost is, and it really boils down, I'm putting that kind of piece together, it boils down to transmission. And he said, we think that Moses in the burning bush, the emphasis is on Moses. We think there's something about the burning bush that spoke to Moses. Jesus went to the desert or the mountain. Something about the desert, the Buddha, the Bodhi tree, something about the Bodhi tree. And just hit home. That's the transmission. And it's not the object, it's finding a whole universe in
turning toward.
Something in relation to the totality of all.
There's the turning toward, not the thing.
Right, there's the totality of all that can be seen. Like you talked in one of your talks about to see the Buddha in the blade of grass.
Yes.
And that's literally what was my awakening was blade of grass, the tree, the sky. And so how, knowing the vastness of those transmissions, do we bring those things in addition to our human relational practice and the vastness of how nature is such a deep and constant teacher to help us hold the seat when we tend to meet in spaces that are buffered from. How do we do this?
The way we're doing it is really not any different. What I hear you asking in the question is,
I mean, it feels the same, and it's something different that I'm struggling to feel the sameness.
something you're struggling with.
Yeah, I feel the sameness. It's like I do feel the sameness of what we're doing, and there's something that I feel is a contraction that can also enter in.
Yes.
Or then there's a wanting of that openness into what seems so accessible when we're more intimate with.
Suzuki Roshi said, big mind is the realization it will always live in small mind. Another time he said we live constantly off balance against a background of perfect balance. All these ways he's trying to communicate this dual nature. It's like when I said to somebody yesterday, is this seem to be going okay? Like the teaching all okay? And various he said, oh, it's really, really good. I said, it's hard for me because what I feel in me and want to communicate And then what comes out seems so paltry compared to what the impulse is. But that's not your experience, from what I hear. But it's my experience because of that, what you just said, right?
Yeah, that helps.
Yeah. There's, look up something here for a second. If there are more people, please raise your hand. I'm just looking at something. I know this is taking a long time.
I have a question while you're looking.
Yes, please.
I'm stumbling a little bit with the word transmission,
Yes.
and how it's being used. I'm not sure what, like, you just went through a transmission, right?
I went through ceremonies of transmission.
And so, what is that exactly?
What is what?
Well, in your experience, so what is it that you just went through? And congratulations, I think would probably be in order, but what is that? And then you were just using the same word, and then it's in our, so I'm just wondering.
This is a good koan. I'm not going to not respond, but
Okay.
I'm just saying it's a good one to stay with because it's
Okay.
confusing
Okay,
and difficult and important. It's one of those questions that's worth staying with and not answering too quickly.
okay.
The ceremonies I went through were an elaborate and ancient ritual, inviting me to take a seat in a long line of men and women who carried this forward. Because it's something that's put in my hands that now I have responsibility for. And it's done at a time when my teacher would see that it's already been done. It's like when two people love each other and they get married, the marriage ceremony doesn't make the marriage. That's a public ceremony to ceremonialize something that's already happened. And so the transmission ceremonies ceremonialize and then seal, like Bodhidharma, put the seal on something that's already happened, but now it's official and people recognize it. But it isn't the transmission itself. They call it in our tradition, warm hand to warm hand. And when we do the documents, there's a bloodline, that connects, because it flows like blood through something. So keep choosing.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, and the idea of like sitting still here, like this idea of like you don't have to go home, and like the idea of like sitting doesn't equal like passivity. So if you look at things in like a social justice lens, like I understand like we have to like find that stillness prior to taking action. But I struggle with like the paradox of like sitting and then what? Because like prayers aren't enough.
But not nearly enough.
Right. So I'm not sure what the question is, but like how do you balance?
No, that's a good one. One of the most important functions probably of Zazen is to help us just not make things worse. We don't carry our own difficulties into whatever we come to. And so that we clarify what needs to be done rather than being reactive. It's really easy to be reactive, but get clearer. I call wisdom. And then operate in a way that has some kindness, even if it's fierce, and helpful. That's compassion. And those two things go together. My teacher, Blanche, said that when she began practicing, it was during the Vietnam War, and she was a peace activist. And there was one day in Berkeley, she was called to make a line of peaceful people between the students and the National Guard. And so she came and sat in that line. And then things didn't go that great. It didn't remain peaceful. And she found herself on the bottom of a pile of bodies, face to face, with a young National Guard person with his shield. And he looked into her eyes and she looked into his eyes. And at that moment, there was no difference. It was the same. He was terrified and she was terrified, and they both wanted the same thing. But he was the enemy. So how could that be? From her social justice point. So she had to figure out something to do, because she knew she could no longer fight for peace. So she practiced so that she could have a different kind of response in the world, and did. She wasn't passive. One of my favorite pictures of her, I'll see if I can find it, is of her walking down Market Avenue in San Francisco under this giant banner that says Free Burma. These people holding it and masses of people behind her. Here's this old woman in full robes with dignity under that sign, with her begging bowl turned upside down, which is a gesture of, I won't take anything until this is solved. Just walking. And she did a lot of things much more active than that, and a lot of my teachers have. Also, more recently in social justice, it has to do with racial inequities. And Earthland Manual that I was just talking about is a Black teacher. So we're trying to find ways to navigate this whole difficult territory with more wisdom and more compassion, not by sitting back and just sitting. The sitting helps us clarify. During the war, Thich Nhat Hanh said at one point, when some of the boat people were trying to escape and these pirates, tried to seize the thing, they toppled the boat and all these people got killed. He was crazy infuriated. So he locked himself in his room for 3 days, because he knew if he did anything right then, he was going to make a big mess until he could get clear enough to know what to do. And then he was quite active in what he did. Robert Aitken Roshi said one time he was listening to Joanna Macy, so have you heard, he was a great practitioner, speak at a nuclear power plant against nuclear stuff. And he said, it would blow your hair off, not just back, listening to her. She was so fierce. And it was wise and it was compassionate. And at the end of it, there was nothing else to say. Everything had been burned away. It was very clear. It's not about being weak and passive and sweet. Sometimes the sword of Manjushri is on fire. Cut through delusion. But you only get that with a lot of deep practice. Otherwise, cause more trouble. So am I speaking?
How do we, in the terms of who's basically is the National Guard, Minneapolis, and this all of the things. And so how do we not other, the National Guard, the police that are killing Black people in my community, other, not being held accountable. So how do we not other those folks who are inflicting harm on?
Bodhisattvas have boundaries. Your vow may be to free all beings, but that doesn't mean you put up with everything. And sometimes you have to say no with a lot of strength. Sometimes you have to stand up for certain things. Sometimes you have to have hard conversations. And all the things that you're seeing happen. It's not a simple answer to it. But without practice, what you're going to do is project and react and just come from all these manners or parts without any clarity. And that just parts invite other parts and just is a big mess. I'm not proud of some of the ways I've felt toward certain people in all these situations who I thought were doing things that are harmful. So I have to keep doing the repentance vow and saying, oh, I'm a person who has that in me, and not act out of it. Because there are sometimes I feel murderous. And that's not proud of that. I don't want that to be how I act or what I feed. So I have to turn toward it, not turn away from it. Every part needs to be turned toward so it can be free, not indulged and acted out of or rejected and exiled. It has to be turned toward so we can be intimate with it and find out how to be released. Then we can act musically. And our job is to help others do the same thing.
It's been a lot. Maybe we should stand up. We've been sitting quite a bit.